The Freys of the Crossing were no nobler than the Butterwells. They owned a bridge instead of cows. That was the only difference. The thoughts of Sir Duncan the Tall on House Frey, the Mystery Knight. House Frey of the Crossing ranks amongst the most influential and controversial noble families in the history of Westeros. Their arms depict two blue towers joined by a bridge upon a silver grey field, a fitting device for a house whose fortunes were built upon a single crossing of the Green Fork. From their seat at the Twins, the Freys command one of the most important passages in the Riverlands. Though they cannot boast the antiquity of the Starks of Winterfell, the Arryns of the Vale, or the Lannisters of Casterly Rock, the Lords of the Crossing nevertheless rose to stand amongst the foremost powers of the Trident. Unlike many great houses, they traced their origin neither to legendary kings nor heroes of the Age of Heroes. Their ascent came not through conquest, but opportunity, persistence, and a keen understanding of the value of their position. For centuries, the Freys expanded their influence through marriages, political maneuvering, and the wealth generated by the crossing at the heart of their house. In time, they became one of the richest houses in the Riverlands, their banner appearing in conflicts that shaped the histories of Westeros during the Dance of the Dragons, the Blackfyre Rebellions, Robert's Rebellion, and the War of the Five Kings. Members of House Frey stood close to many of the defining events of their age, loved by few, respected by some, and distrusted by many. They remain amongst the most discussed noble families in all of Westeros. The origin of House Frey stretches back around 6 centuries before the start of the main book series. By the standards of Westeros, that makes them a comparatively young house. Whilst dynasties such as the Starks, Blackwoods and Lannisters claimed histories measuring in the thousands of years, the Freys began as modest Riverland lords, sworn to greater powers. Their fortunes changed when the family undertook the construction of a bridge across the Green Fork of the Trident. The undertaking was immense. 3 generations laboured before the crossing was finished, but when the work was finally complete, the Freys found themselves masters of one of the most valuable routes in the Riverlands. Merchants, travellers, nobles and armies alike now possessed a convenient means of crossing the river, and all whom passed were required to pay the Freys toll. The wealth produced by the crossing transformed the family. Silver flowed steadily into their coffers, allowing successive generations to strengthen their holdings, acquire more land, and increase their standing amongst the other riverlords. Whilst many noble houses derived their authority from ancient bloodlines or martial glory, the Freys built theirs through commerce, geography, and careful stewardship of their seat. It was an unusual path to prominence, and one that many of their rivals never cease to mock. To secure their greatest assets, the Freys eventually raised strong fortifications upon both banks of the Green Fork. Over time, these castles became known collectively as the Twins. More than a seat of power, the Twins became the very foundation of House Frey's identity. Every generation that followed owed its fortunes to the bridge that connected the two castles and the river that flowed beneath it. The gatehouse towers emerged from the rain like ghosts, hazy grey apparitions that grew more solid the closer they rode. The Frey stronghold was not one castle, but 2 mirror images in wet stone standing on opposite sides of the water, linked by a great arched bridge. The thoughts of Catelyn Stark on the Twins. A Storm of Swords Chapter 49, Catelyn 6. The true source of House Frey's power was not an army, or an ancient claim of royal blood, but the Twins themselves. Standing astride the Green Fork, the great fortress dominated one of the most important crossings in the Riverlands. Few castles in Westeros owe so much their significance to their position, and fewer still have shaped the course of so many wars. The Twins consist of 2 castles facing one another across the river, joined by a stone bridge that gave House Frey both its reputation and fortune. Strong walls, gatehouses, towers and defensive works guard either end of the crossing, ensuring that any traveller seeking passage must do so beneath the watchful gaze of the lords of the crossing. In times of peace, the bridge brought wealth. Merchants paid tolls upon their goods. Travellers paid for safe passage, and the silver thus collected enriched generation after generation of House Frey. In times of war, however, the value of the crossing became even greater. Armies moving through the Riverlands often found the Green Fork stood between them and their destination. To cross swiftly and safely, they frequently required the permission of House Frey. Thus, while other noble houses relied upon the size of their dominions or ancient lineage, the Freys' power came from geography. Kings, lords, commanders, whoever might otherwise have ignored the family, often found themselves compelled to negotiate with the lords of the crossing, with the bridge granting the Freys a measure of influence disproportionate to the size of the family and their land. Throughout the centuries, the control of the twins repeatedly proved significant during times of conflict. Armies marching north or south through the Riverlands commonly sought passage through the crossing, and the Lord of the Twins seldom missed an opportunity to exact concessions, secure alliances, or improve their standing. In this fashion, the bridge served not merely as a source of wealth, but as a political weapon. By the reign of the Targaryens, the Twins had become far more than a castle. It was the very foundation upon which House Frey had built its fortune. Without it, the Freys would have remained minor riverlords. With it, they become one of the most powerful houses, not just along the Trident or in the Riverlands, but perhaps the realm itself. By the time Aegon the Conqueror and his sisters set foot upon the shores of Blackwater Bay, House Frey had already spent centuries profiting from the crossing of the Green Fork. By this time, the Freys had grown wealthy enough to be counted amongst the principal riverlords. At the time, the Riverlands formed part of the Kingdom of the Isles and Rivers, ruled by the Ironborn kings of House Hoare. Like many of their neighbours, House Frey owed allegiance to King Harren Hoare, remembered to many as Harren the Black. Yet when Aegon the Conqueror began his conquest of Westeros, the loyalties of the Riverlords proved less durable than Harren had hoped. As rebellion spread throughout the Trident, House Frey joined many other of the great and lesser Riverlands houses in abandoning the Ironborn king. The Freys threw their support behind House Tully and the other Riverlords who rose against Harren and declared for Aegon the Conqueror. Their decision proved a wise one. Harren and his sons perished within the burning towers of Harrenhal, and the Kingdom of the Isles and Rivers came to a fiery end. In the settlement that followed, Aegon raised House Tully as Lord Paramounts of the Trident. Beneath them stood a number of powerful bannermen, amongst whom House Frey counted prominently. Though the Freys had gained no kingdom, they had secured something almost as valuable, a place within Aegon's new order. The centuries that followed were prosperous ones for the Lords of the Crossing. Targaryen peace encouraged trade throughout the realm, and trade inevitably brought more merchants, travellers and nobles to the Green Fork. With every passing year, more gold found its way into the Frey coffers. Many older houses continue to regard the Freys with a measure of disdain, yet wealth has a way of commanding respect, even when affection is lacking. As generations passed, it became increasingly difficult for the Riverlords to simply dismiss the growing power of the twins. In the years prior to the Dance of the Dragons, House Frey had firmly established itself amongst the foremost noble families of the Trident. It was during this period that the house produced two of their most notable figures, Lord Forrest Frey and his wife, Lady Sabitha Frey. Together, they would guide House Frey through the bloodshed of the Dance of the Dragons and ensure the banners of the crossing were counted amongst those that helped decide the fate of the Targaryen dynasty. Forrest Frey, in his youth, gained a measure of notoriety when he sought the hand of Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen. The attempt came to nothing, and some of his contemporaries mocked him for his ambition, bestowing upon him the name Fool Frey. Yet history has a fondness for irony. When civil war later erupted over Rhaenyra's claim to the Iron Throne, House Frey would become one of her most important supporters. When the dance divided the realm, Lord Forrest declared for Rhaenyra and the Black faction. Like many of the Riverlords, he committed both men and resources to her cause. Frey forces aided Prince Daemon Targaryen during the taking of Stonehenge, and the banners of the crossing marched alongside many of the most important supporters of the Black cause throughout the Riverlands. The war eventually drew Forrest into the campaigns around the God's Eye, where he joined Lord Roderick Dustin and Robb Rivers, bringing with him 200 knights and 600 footmen. By then, the dance had become a conflict of exhaustion and attrition, with armies, dragons, and noble houses alike paying a terrible price. Forrest would not live to see the war's conclusion. He was slain fighting the Westermen at the Battle by the Lakeshore, one of the major engagements of the conflict. His death deprived House Frey of its lord at a time when much of the realm remained engulfed in chaos and uncertainty. Yet the role of House Frey in the dance did not end with Forrest's fall. Leadership of the family passed to his widow, Lady Sabitha Frey, a woman who proved every bit as formidable as her late husband, and whose deeds would secure her place amongst the most remarkable figures of her generation. If Lord Forrest Frey brought House Frey into the dance, it was his widow who ensured the family remained amongst the foremost supporters of Rhaenyra throughout the war. Born a member of House Viperen, Lady Sabatha was remembered as a formidable and forceful woman. Septon Eustace describes her as merciless and grasping, whilst even those more favourably inclined towards her seldom denied her determination or ambition. What judgment one chose to make of her character, there can be little doubt that Sabatha possessed the strength required to survive one of the bloodiest periods in Westerosi history. She first emerged into prominence in the Chronicles when Lord Roderick Dustin and his Winter Wolves crossed the Neck and marched south to join the war. It was she who greeted them with the twins and welcomed them into the Riverlands. Not long thereafter, the death of Lord Forrest Frey left the Frey levies without their lord. Rather than withdraw from the struggle, Sabatha assumed command herself and continued House Frey's support of the Black faction. Her resolve became particularly evident during the campaign that followed the departure of Prince Aemon Targaryen and Sir Criston Cole from Harrenhal. Seizing the opportunity, she occupied the great fortress and claimed it in Rhaenyra's name. Yet if taking Harrenhal was impressive, holding it proved impossible. Aemon returned unexpectedly on his dragon Vhagar, and the Lady of the Crossing found herself facing the largest and most fearsome dragon remaining in the dance. Mushroom, never one to pass over colourful details, claimed she escaped by hiding in a privy whilst Vhagar's shadow passed overhead. Whether this account is wholly true, or merely another embellishment from the court fool, cannot be known. What is certain is that Sabatha survived the encounter and successfully withdrew to the safety of the twins, avoiding the fate that befell so many who found themselves in Prince Aemon's warpath during his burning in the Riverlands. The loss of Harrenhal did little to diminish her commitment to the war. As the conflict entered the final stages, Sabatha continued to ride with the armies of the Blacks. She joined Sir Adam Velaryon during the campaigns that culminated in the Second Battle of Tumbleton, and later fought alongside the victorious host at the Battle of the King's Road. Whilst many lords sought safety behind their walls, she remained an active participant in the war that would determine the fate of the realm. It was during these later campaigns that her name became forever linked with that of Lady Alysanne Blackwood, better known to history as Black Aly. Contemporary accounts agree that the two women spent considerable time together during the closing stages of the war. They rode together, campaigned together, and were said to have shared tents whilst marching with their armies that eventually would enter King's Landing. From these circumstances arose rumours that endured long after both women had passed from the world. Some chroniclers claim that Sabatha preferred the company of women to men, whilst others hinted at a deeper affection between the Lady of the Crossing and Alysanne Blackwood. No proof exists one way or the other, as it is with so many matters recorded by the historians of Westeros. It certainly remains elusive. Yet the presence of the story suggests that many who knew the women found them plausible enough to repeat. When peace finally returned to the realm, and the Council of Regents was assembled to govern the minority of King Aegon III, Sabatha's absence from the Regency Council was noted by a number of contemporaries, given her service in the war and her prominence among the Riverlords. Some expected that she would be offered a place upon the Regency Council. According to Septon Eustace, however, she took no offence at the omission. Rather than involve herself in the intrigue of King's Landing, she returned to the twins and devoted her attention to restoring order in the northern Riverlands. There, she helped set up the widows' fairs. During these gatherings, widows left behind by the dance were encouraged to wed landless Stark soldiers who had chosen to remain south after the war. The arrangements provided husbands for the widows, lands and livelihoods for the Northmen, and a measure of stability for the region that had suffered greatly during the conflict. Thus ended the most notable chapter in the life of Sabitha Frey, warrior, commander, ruler, and survivor she remains one of the most remarkable women to ever rule over the twins. Though many generations of Freys would leave their mark upon the history of Westeros, few did so quite as forcefully as the Lady of the Crossing during the dance. So much for guest rights. The blood is on Walder Frey's hands, not mine. Walder Frey is a peevish old man who lives to fondle his young wife and brood over all the slights he suffered. I have no doubt he hatched this ugly chicken, but he would never have dared such a thing without a promise of protection. Tyrion Lannister and Tywin Lannister on Walder Frey. A Storm of Swords, Chapter 53. Tyrion 6. In later generations, House Frey continued to appear at the edge of great events. A Frey banner was seen at the tourney at Ashford Meadow. At White Walls, a Lord Frey attended the wedding tourney of Lord Ambrose Butterwell, bringing with him his daughters, his well-regarded brother Sir Franklin and his nephew Sir Adam, and a boy of 4, Walder Frey, who would one day become Lord of the Crossing. The Freys left White Walls before Daemon II Blackfyre could be crowned, in that, as in much else, fortune favoured them. Others would suffer for the treason uncovered there. The Freys departed before the snare closed. By the closing years of the Targaryen dynasty, Walder had become a dominant figure of the house. The crossing remained rich, the bridge remained vital, and the Freys spread themselves throughout a growing web of marriages and descendants. Yet for all the power the family generated, Walder's reputation would be marked by one late arrival. During Robert's rebellion, Lord Walder brought his levies to the Trident, only after the rebels had already won the day. Prince Rhaegar Targaryen had fallen, the royal host had broken, the battle that decided the war was over before the Freys reached the field. Lord Hoster Tully thereafter called his bannerman the late Lord Frey, a name Walder despised and one he would never wholly escape. By the opening years of the War of the Five Kings, Walder was nearly 90 years old enough to have outlived rivals, friends, wives and heirs alike. Time had withered him, but he had not lessened his appetite for advancement. He had made marriage his chosen weapon, offering Frey brides where he could, and seeking high matches for his sons, daughters and grandsons, and his granddaughters. Not all such offers were welcome. Lord Hoster Tully refused a Frey bride for his son and heir Edmure. Lord John Arryn would not foster Walder's grandsons at court, nor would he send young Robert Arryn to be fostered as the twins. Yet Walder persisted. One notable success came when he wed his son Emmon Frey to Jenna Lannister, daughter of Lord Tytos Lannister, despite the objections of Titus's son Tywin. Many who met the Freys saw the old lord in them. Sir Stevron Frey, his eldest son and heir, was said to resemble a weasel like his father. Walder Rivers, his bastard, bore the same suspicious face. The likeness was more than flesh. By the time war returned to Westeros, Lord Walder had filled the twins with sons, daughters, bastards, grandsons, great-grandsons, and even more distant kin, all bound to him, all waiting upon him, and many waiting for him to die. When Catelyn Stark seized Tyrion Lannister at the Inn of the Crossroad, Frey men were amongst those present and carried word back to the twins. Soon the Riverlands were aflame. Lord Edmure Tully called his banners. Walder was slow to answer. His men skirmished with Lannister outriders, yet the strength of House Frey remained gathered behind the walls of the twins, while Jaime Lannister defeated Edmure Tully before Riverrun. Then Robb Stark came south with a host of Northmen. To reach Riverrun and break the siege, he needed the crossing of the Green Fork. Without the twins, his march would be delayed, perhaps ruined. Once more, the bridge made House Frey indispensable. Catelyn Stark, whom herself was a Tully, entered the twins to treat with Lord Walder. The price was high. Robb Stark would wed one of Walder's daughters when the war was done. Arya Stark was promised to Elmer Frey. Big Walder and Little Walder were sent north to Winterfell as wards, and Olyvar Frey became Robb's squire. In return, the Freys opened the crossing and joined the northern cause. Amongst the many sons of Lord Walder, none was more important than Sir Stevron Frey, heir to the twins, the son of Walder and Lady Pera Royce. Stevron had spent much of his life preparing for lordship that never came. By the War of the Five Kings, he was already in his 60s. He was said to be polite, amiable and reasonable, though his appearance showed his age. He had watery grey eyes, and Catelyn Stark thought he bore the same weasel-like face of his father. Walder had groomed Stevron to rule. even jesting that his son had been waiting 40 years for him to die. Yet Stevron seemed to have learned from his father's importance of blood and family without inheriting all of the old lord's bitterness. When Robb's army reached the twins, Stevron led the first parley beneath the walls. Once the pact was made, he commanded the Frey contingent that marched west with Robb. At Riverrun, after Jaime Lannister's capture, Stevron urged caution. He suggested that the Northmen and Riverlords allowed Tywin Lannister and Renly Baratheon to weaken one another before committing themselves further. This counsel was not heeded. Instead, Robb was held as king in the north and king of the Trident. Stevron remained with Robb when the young king carried the war into the west. At Oxcross, he personally led Frey soldiers into battle and was wounded. The wound was not grave, yet 3 days later he was found dead in his tent. Thus passed the heir Lord Walder had raised to rule, and in his place came Stevron's son, Sir Emmon Frey. Not all Freys fought beneath Robb's banner. Sir Cleos, the eldest son of Sir Emmon Frey and Jenna Lannister, fought for the Lannisters when the war began, bound as much to Casterly Rock by blood as to the Crossing by name. At the Whispering Wood he was captured beside Sir Jaime and taken prisoner. Captivity made Cleos useful. Robb sent him to King's Landing with peace terms. Tyrion Lannister and Queen Cersei rejected them outright, but Cleos returned to Riverrun with the Lannister answer regardless. He also brought with him the bones of Eddard Stark, a grim courtesy to the family of a man whose death had helped set half the realm aflame. Later, when Catelyn Stark freed Jaime in the hopes of recovering her lost daughters, Cleos was released as well and sent south with him and Brienne of Tarth. He did not survive the journey. Outlaw archers ambushed the party on the road. Cleos was struck by arrows. His horse bolted and he was dragged to his death. So ended a Frey who had served as an envoy more than a warrior, undone not by lords and kings, but by the chaos of war that they had unleashed. For a time, the bond between Stark and Frey seemed secure. Frey men had fought in Robb's armies. Oliver served him loyally as a squire. Big Walder and Little Walder remained in Winterfell, but the pact made with the twins rested upon one promise, and that promise Robb Stark broke. Word came to the twins that the king in the north had wed Jane Westerling instead of the Frey bride he'd sworn to take. Whether honour or folly moved Robb, Lord Walder saw only insult. Sir Emmon Frey, now heir to the Crossing, withdrew Frey's support in outrage. Still, the breach was not the end of negotiations. Lord Walder sent his son, Lothar Frey, to treat with Robb and the Tullys. A new match was arranged. Lord Edmure Tully would wed Rosalind Frey, and by this marriage, the wrong done to House Frey would be answered. Robb, Catelyn, Edmure, and many other northern lords returned to the twins beneath the protection of guest rights for the wedding. In the midst of slaughter, the Lord of the Crossing sat on his carved oaken throne, watching greedily. Catelyn's thoughts of the Red Wedding. A Storm of Swords, Chapter 51, Catelyn 7. Edmure Tully took Rosalind Frey to wife, and for a brief moment the feast that followed seemed to promise reconciliation. The musicians played, cups were filled, guests ate beneath the roof of the Lord of the Crossing, bound by one of the oldest and most sacred customs of Westeros, guest rights. Then the music changed, and the killing began. Frey and Bolton men fell upon the guests. Robb Stark was murdered, Catelyn Stark slain, and many of the northern lords and river lords who had followed them were butchered. Outside the castle, the northern host was attacked and destroyed. In one night, the victories at the Whispering Wood, the camps, and Oxcross were undone. The Starks' cause in the south was broken, and the name, the Red Wedding, passed into history. Nor was the slaughter merely vengeance of an old man slighted in marriage. Lord Walder had conspired with Tywin Lannister and Roose Bolton. When the blood had dried, Walder swore loyalty to King Joffrey, and House Frey received rewards for its treachery, foremost amongst them Riverrun. The ancient seat of House Tully was granted to Walder's son Emmon Frey, husband to Jenna Lannister, for a house long mocked as toll collectors and upstarts. The prize was immense. The Freys had the twins already. Now by royal decree, one of their own was Lord of Riverrun as well. Yet parchment and possession are not the same. Riverrun did not pass into Frey hands quietly. Sir Brendan Tully, the Blackfish, continued to hold the castle against both Frey and Lannisters. Emmon might have the title, but the Blackfish had the walls. Thus did the Freys find themselves besieging the very castle they had been awarded. Emmon was present, and with him his wife Jenna Lannister, whose strength of will far exceeded his own. The grant of Riverrun bound Frey ambition to Lannister power, but it also placed the Freys at the centre of every lingering resentment in the Riverlands. In time, Jaime Lannister came to resolve the siege. Rather than storm the castle, he used threats, promise, and Admiral Tully's love for his unborn child to compel Riverrun's surrender. The gates opened, and Emmon Frey at last took possession of his new seat. Yet even then the victory was incomplete. Brynden Tully escaped, denying the Freys the capture of their most dangerous Tully foe. By then, House Frey had reached a height few could have imagined when the first wooden bridge was raised across the Green Fork. The twins remained theirs. Riverrun had been granted to them. Their sons and daughters were tied by blood and marriage to houses great and small. Yet Walder Frey's greatest strength was also the seed of future strife. He made too many Freys. Sons, daughters, bastards, grandsons, great-grandsons, cousins, and in-laws crowded the twins and its cadet branches. Every birth moved someone further from inheritance. Every death moved others closer. Stevron's passing had raised Ryman. Ryman's son, Edwin, and Black Walder watched one another warily. Elsewhere stood Emmon, Lothar, Hostine, Aenys, Walder Rivers, Big Walder, Little Walder, and more besides, each with his own claims, hopes, grievances, and ambitions. Amongst his descendants were a few more feared than Black Walder Frey, the son of Ryman and grandson of Stevron. He was a weary man with a black beard, though some had named him Black Walder, owed less to the colouring of his hair than to his temper. Resolute, stern, and quick to anger, he inspired fear amongst his own kin. Rumours clung to him like burrs. He refused to marry, yet was said to have bedded wives, cousins, and women who should have been far beyond his reach. Some whispered that many younger Freys might owe more to Black Walder than the men who claimed them. Such tales were unproven, but they were believed by enough to make his presence troubling. In a family where inheritance was everything, doubts over blood could be dangerous as a sword. Nor did suspicion end there. Edwin Frey mistrusted his brother deeply, and not without cause, in the eyes of some. Black Walder was feared, ambitious, and close enough to power that every death before him in the line of succession seemed to cast a longer shadow. A different sort of Frey was Walder Rivers, called Bastard Walder. The eldest of Lord Walder's bastards, he could never hope to inherit the twins, yet his lord father made use of him often. Gruff, dour, and grey-haired, with the same suspicious face as his father, he was harsh, sour, and blunt as a soldier. Walder Rivers had not the courtesy of high birth, nor the promise of lordship, but he had ability. He commanded men, carried messages, judged criminals, and was entrusted with duties that true-born Freys might have coveted. In the camps and sieges that followed the Red Wedding, he was one of the more capable instruments of Frey power, a bastard more useful than any legitimate son. The younger generation were no less aware of the tangle of blood and inheritance. Big Walder and Little Walder, sent to Winterfell as wards, learned early where they stood in the long line of descendants from the Lord of the Crossing. The names confused many, for Big Walder was the younger boy, whilst Little Walder was the elder. Yet Big Walder stood higher in the succession. Little Walder was larger and louder of the two, bold and boisterous. Big Walder was quieter and more watchful, and keenly aware of how many deaths stood between him and greatness. Their talk of inheritance was not prattle of children alone. It was the language of the twins, learned in youth and not easily forgotten. After the Red Wedding, both boys remained in the north, where Frey fortunes became entangled with those of House Bolton. At Winterfell, in the midst of snow, suspicion and hunger, Little Walder was found murdered, his death flamed by the already bitter quarrels between House Frey and House Manderly, and no certain answer was given to who had killed him. Big Walder survived, quieter than ever, whilst another name vanished from his long list of the bloody succession of House Frey. The enemies of the Freys were not confined to the north. In the Riverlands, the Brotherhood without banners had changed. What had begun as a band sworn to protect the small folk became, under Lady Stoneheart, an instrument of vengeance. She had once been Catelyn Stark. Death had taken her at the twins, and something darker had returned in her place. So Merritt Frey was amongst the first of Lord Walder's sons to learn what it meant. Captured by the Brotherhood, he was brought before the silent woman with the ruined throat and dead eyes. Merritt protested, blamed others, pleaded he had done little more than drink. Lady Stoneheart gave him no mercy. Others followed. Freys and their allies found the road less safe than before. Men vanished. Outlaws struck from the woods and ruins. Sir Emmon Frey, heir to the twins after Stevron, was taken and hanged as well. another corpse added to the growing tally of the Red Wedding's unpaid debt. Nor had the North forgotten. Lord Wyman Manderley of White Harbour, whose son Wendell had died beneath guest rights at the Twins, gave outwardly signs of submission. He treated with Freys, entertained envoys, and spoke the words required by the king and court. Yet beneath his courtesy lay grief, and beneath grief vengeance. Jared Frey, Simon Frey, and Rhaegar Frey vanished after leaving White Harbour. Their fate was never plainly set down. Later at Winterfell, Lord Wyman served great meat pies to the assembled company, and many came to suspect the missing Freys had found their way into those pies. The truth remains unproven, but the tale endured, foul and fitting in the eyes of those who remembered the rat cook and the curse of broken guest rights. Whatever the pies contained, Wyman's heart was made plain enough when he declared that the North remembers the Red Wedding had destroyed Robb Stark's cause in the South, but it had not destroyed memory. From the Riverlands to White Harbour, men and women remembered what had been done beneath the towers of the crossing. For all the deaths that followed, House Frey endured. That was the strength of Walder's blood. One Frey might hang, another vanish, a third fall in battle, and still the twins remained full of them. Edwin, Black Walder, Walder Rivers, Big Walder, Hostine Frey, Aenys Frey, Lothar Frey, Emmon Frey, and countless others still move through the story, bound by blood and divided by ambition. Unlike House Strong, House Hoare, or the Rains, the Freys were not extinguished. At the close of the published books, Walder Frey yet lives, old and spiteful, with the twins beneath him. Riverrun is now in Frey hands, and enemies gather in every shadow. Walder Frey's house had risen higher than any of its founders could have ever dreamed. It had won wealth, castles, marriages and power, yet it also won hatred in equal measure. The bridge still stands across the Greenfork. The towers face one another over the water. Frey still hold the crossing, but the future of the house remains unsettled. Crowded with heirs, haunted by murder, and stained by a wedding feast that no lord in Westeros is likely to forget.